Before we actually get to that, though, Russell today is going to talk about framing.
Right.
And, not in the sense of making somebody else look guilty for something.
Well, in a way it is. But,
is it?
Not exactly. First, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why do we have a cow on the control board?
This, see, now we know that my coffee cup I named Muhammad.
Okay.
After they named that bear Muhammad.
Is this a sacred cow by any chance?
It may be, but my coffee cup broke, you see. And so this is now Muhammad. Who is going to be one of the mascots of the show, which was set up here.
I move that we describe him as Muhammad the Sacred Cow.
Muhammad the Sacred Cow. The Holy Cow. Would it be Holy Cow, Sacred Cow? Let us know. Is it better Holy Cow or Sacred Cow?
I like sacred.
So last week we had the bunny rabbit in the Jesus Loves Me t-shirt on the cross. And we stuffed him into a box afterwards. And I can't confirm this myself directly, but what I've heard is that sometime within a couple of days after stuffing him in the box, and the reports don't necessarily disagree. Some people told me that Shelley checked the box. Somebody else said that Joe and Shelley, and somebody else said that it was Steve and Joe and the others went and checked this box. And what they found, and the reports also don't agree. I mean, some the lid was already off the box, and some the lid was moved off the box magically when they got there. But the thing that all the reports agree on is the rabbit was not in the box. That's proof enough for me that the rabbit's been resurrected.
One person wrote that 500 other people had seen the rabbit actually come out of the box. I couldn't get in touch with any of those people, but he said that there were 500 witnesses, so that should be
And I heard that from somebody else, and the fact that we both heard it from sources makes it more reliable. So we should write it down so that, a couple hundred years from now or even...
It will be indisputable.
Yeah, sure.
Especially if you
Why would we
write
lie?
it and I write it.
Why would we have no reason to lie? We're honestly reporting on what happened. I promise.
Right. So I'm going to talk about framing today.
Dun, dun, dun.
And framing, I think, as you were saying right before the show, is a really nebulous term. It's hard to pin down a definition. I think by the way, as is often the case when I present on the show, I went to the effort of putting a blog post on the Atheist Experience blog right before the show. That's atheistexperience.blogspot.com. And it's not much. It's just links to most of the stuff that I turned up while reading about this topic. So if you want to follow along with me in your book, go to atheistexperience.blogspot.com now. So I'm going to start with the Wikipedia explanation of what framing is, and as with many things on Wikipedia, it's kind of hit or miss, so take it with a grain of salt. Framing, a term used in media studies, sociology, and psychology, refers to the social construction of a social phenomena by media sources or specific political or social movements or organizations to advance their causes or views. Framing is an inevitable process of selective influence over the individual's perception of the meanings attributed to words or phrases. A frame defines the packaging of an element of rhetoric in such a way as to encourage certain interpretations and discourage others. Now, the English version. I didn't go so far as to print out an English version, but I have examples of representatives of people who talk about framing. I think the most notorious, this is used a lot in politics, and so there's a well-known Republican framing guy named Frank Luntz, who came up with a lot of interesting buzzwords. Some people say that he was kind of instrumental in the big sweep of Congress in 1994. Right. And on the other side, we have a chap named George Lakoff who actually looked at Frank Luntz and said, "Hey, here's something we're doing," and then sort of wrote down what his opinions were about framing instead of Frank Luntz, who just did it.
And this, by the way, I mean, if I'm understanding it correctly, and we talked about this a little bit before the show about kind of my layman's distilled definition of framing.
Yeah, you tell us your English version.
Well, to me, this is nothing new, because there's the old adage that it's not what you say, but how you say it. And
Right.
framing is how you present your argument, or it's a process of presenting your argument in such a way that the greatest percentage of your target audience accepts it.
I think that's correct.
And I like the fact that there's a target audience in there, because without that, there is no framing. There is,
Right.
The frame's kind of central to you. But in this, what ends up happening with framing is that it ends up being used to manipulate.
I think framing is kind of you could say that there's an objective side to every argument and there's a subjective side. And what framing says is basically that you sort of embrace the subjective. You say, okay, the way my arguments are accepted is going to depend on how well my audience relates to me. And so I'm going to use this to my advantage. I'm going to use my understanding of my audience and try to win over as many of them as possible to my argument, which may or may not have objective merit to it.
Right.
This is from the Wikipedia entry on George Lakoff. Lakoff argues that the differences in opinions between liberals and conservatives follows from the fact that they subscribe with different strength to different metaphors about the relationship of the state to its citizens. Both, he claims, see governance through metaphors of the family. Conservatives would subscribe more strongly and more often to a model that he calls the strict father model, and has a family structured around a strong dominant father, government, and assumes that the children, citizens, need to be disciplined to be made into responsible adults, financially and morally responsible beings. However, the children are adults, and so the father should not interfere with their lives. The government should stay out of the business of those in society who have proved their responsibility. In contrast, Lakoff argues that liberals place more support in a model of the family, which he calls the nurturant parent model, based on nurturant values where both mothers and fathers work to keep the essentially good children away from corrupting influences, pollution, social injustice, poverty, etc. Lakoff says that most people have a blend of both metaphors applied at different times, and that most people have and that political speech works primarily by invoking these metaphors and urging the subscription of one over the other. Here are some examples of political framing from Wikipedia, and I'm going to bring this back to atheism in a minute, but I think this kind of was born as a political term and has only been applied to atheism and science more recently.
Well, one of the things that I find kind of curious is that I'm not completely sure where I fall in the political spectrum, depending on what subject we're talking about. But I don't think I subscribe to either the father model or the mother model. I tend to subscribe to something.
This doesn't strike me as what I've read that Lakoff actually said, and I think this might be the end result of sort of competing edits, because it seems like kind of a schizophrenic description of what he said.
Yeah, and I think I would tend to view the government more as my employee who I've hired to run the business of my life that I'm too busy to run in my daily business.
Yeah, I might buy that.
They shouldn't, they have no need to intrude on my life, but they're there to serve me. They're public servants. They're there to represent my interests and my rights, when discussing how everybody interacts.
One thing I've thought about George Lakoff in the past is that he might have been good at sort of identifying what people are doing, but he's not very good at identifying what the actual frames are and how to use language effectively. He just basically said, hey, look, some people use language more effectively than others, and we should try to harness that, Lakoff being a liberal. But I think he's been kind of not so good at identifying what effective language is, and I think that this guy I'm going to talk about later, Matthew Nisbet, is kind of the same way. A couple of political examples of framing are, for instance, talking about counterterrorism as either law enforcement or war. Lakoff said that Colin Powell argued with the Bush administration that the assault of September 11, 2001 should be treated as a crime, and this would have involved international crime-fighting techniques. But instead of going with the crime frame, the Bush the Bush administration went with the war frame and pitched it that way. Another example that was brought up on Wikipedia is the recent popularization of the term surge to describe what some other people call an escalation of the war in Iraq. You can see that if you use one word, it sounds like a good thing. Like, we're surging to victory, was, I believe, the language that was used to pitch this. Whereas if you describe it as an escalation, like, more war, then people come away with a negative opinion of it.
And it's one of the things that, I remember Bush took heat for using the word crusade. That's become such a taboo word that no matter what you're trying to do, that's not going to go over in any framing of what's going on. And it may be the case that what he actually meant by that is something that could have been accepted by the majority of people, whatever, if he'd framed it differently.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, we can't know now.
Nope. Okay, so I'm going to go now to an article that was written by a chap named Matthew Nisbet on Sunday, April 15th, 2007. Matthew Nisbet, I looked up his, he has a blog. The blog is scienceblogs.com/framing science, I think, or just search for framing science. And his blurb on the blog says, Matthew Nisbet, PhD, is a professor in the School of Communication at American University, where his research focuses on the intersections between science, media, and politics. This is an article that was co-written by Matthew Nisbet and Chris Mooney, who's written a number of books on science. The title of the book is Thanks for the Facts, Now Sell Them. I'm sorry, the title of the article. It says, if the defenders of evolution wanted to give their creationist adversaries a boost, it's hard to see how they could do better than Richard Dawkins, the famous Oxford scientist who had a bestseller with The God Delusion, and who, I'll add, we saw a couple of weeks ago and all enjoyed.
Spoke to. It's the dick to the doc to the PhD. And somebody out there will get that. We were going to show the video today, but it'll have to wait.
Okay. So this is obviously an article that starts off right away critical of Richard Dawkins, and so you can probably tell where our opinions fall on this article.
Maybe. The thing is that there are people who are critical of Richard Dawkins in some other area, and I may actually agree with them.
Yeah.
It's not like Richard Dawkins is the infallible pope of atheism that he often, gets labeled with.
No, in fact, the first thing that that I did as soon as we came out of that Dawkins lecture was come up with some critical things to say about it.
Yeah, everybody enjoyed it. We actually went to Spider House Cafe afterwards and talked about it. And one of the things that kept coming up was, we agree here. At this point, we think probably could have been handled better, or he gave a good answer here and a bad answer here.
Yeah, or we would have handled that better on the show, or something
or
like
I
that.
happen to prefer this explanation, or there are some cases where, I think he's just dead wrong here, or he's not, attacking this point as, some of us might like.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Dawkins certainly isn't in himself, I think, the leader of anything in the atheist movement. I think he's just a good, solid speaker.
A good, solid speaker who we worship and sacrifice children to. Oh, did I say it out loud?
Shoot.
No.
Not even so much his speaking abilities. It's his writing abilities and his scientific background that a lot of us respect. But anyway, Matt Nisbet and Chris Mooney are basically advancing the case here that Richard Dawkins is a harmful figure in the pitching of science to an American populace who don't necessarily have as much respect for science as they should. Nisbet and Mooney go on. Leave aside for a moment the validity of Dawkins' arguments against religion. The fact remains the public cannot be expected to differentiate between his advocacy of evolution and his atheism. More than 80% of Americans believe in God, after all, and many fear that teaching evolution in our schools could undermine the belief system that they consider the foundation of morality. Dawkins not only reinforces and validates such fears, baseless though they may be, but lends them an exclamation point. We agree with Dawkins on evolution and admire his books, so we don't enjoy singling him out, but he stands as a particularly stark example of scientists' failure to explain hot-button issues such as global warming and evolution to a wary public. Scientists excel at research, creating knowledge is their forte, but presenting this knowledge to the public is something else altogether. It's here that scientists and their allies are stumbling in our information-overloaded society, even as scientific information itself is being yanked to center stage in high-profile debates.
Now, here's a spot where I agree with what Nesbitt is saying.
Tentatively.
This is Chris Nesbitt, or is this Chris Mooney? Or it's both of them.
This
is both of them in this article.
Nesbitt and Mooney.
The problem that they see is that scientists have generally done a poor job of engaging the public interest in science, and they attribute this to framing. And that may be the case. There may be a better way of framing science. I certainly think that people like Bill Nye have done a good job of encouraging an interest in science in younger people. And maybe we have failed, but it may be that the problem isn't something that could be solved by framing at all. It may be that the general public, or at least the adult public, was never had this fire within them to appreciate science or have an interest in it. It just becomes kind of...
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I mean, the problem that I see with pitching science is that you've got a framing of science, not that it's belligerent and mean, which is apparently what they think that Dawkins pitches, but that it's boring. I mean, the thing that I hear the most coming from like young students is, you know, how is this math and science stuff ever going to affect me when I'm all grown up and doing whatever it is that I want to do that has nothing to do with math and science?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the image of the sort of stodgy, boring person. If I can call an image to mind, yes, that was exactly what I was going to say.
I trampled your punchline. Sorry.
Ben Stein. Ben Stein is like the stereotypical, really boring, educated guy who wants to tell you. I think he was teaching history in that, but you know, no big difference. If you're smart, then you're a boring egghead.
Something D-O-O economics, voodoo economics. Anyway.
Right.
See, that's the Ben Stein that we actually liked.
Yes.
He was almost entertaining then.
He was funny by presenting a persona that was not funny.
Yeah. The thing is that now seeing the Ben Stein
really
that's come afterwards, I'm not sure he was acting at all in there. I'm not sure that he was, you know, trying to present anything humorous. It may have been his serious representation of...
Yeah, they probably just
of academia.
Told him, Ben, we want you to give a good example of a high school teacher. No, I'm sorry. I kid Ben Stein.
Yeah, me too. But he friggin' deserves it.
Yeah.
We'll get more to that as the April release of Expelled comes out.
Right.
We've avoided talking about some of it, and people email asking. I'm actually saving up so that we can do a show on Expelled after we've seen it and talk about the whole history of stuff up to then.
Yeah, but, well, actually I'm going to undercut that a little bit because I'm going to get to some recent news about the movie Expelled, which we've talked about a bunch of times on both shows already. But this is so entertaining that I can't get enough of it. But anyway, getting back to the point about Matt Nesbitt and Chris Mooney's take on framing science. I think that they're mistaken about the problem that science has with its public image. The problem isn't that people are scared that science leads to atheism. The big problem that science has is appearing stodgy and boring. And I also think that a little combativeness and a little more public argumentation on behalf of science is actually a good thing because it puts the stuff in the news. I mean, Richard Dawkins has been a very controversial figure recently. But also, when we went to see Richard Dawkins 2 weeks ago, there were lines around the block.
Yeah.
I mean, people were excited and interested to go and hear a guy whose main credentials are that he's the Charles Simonyi Professor of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University. And that's kind of fantastic if you think about it.
Except
yeah,
that I don't think anybody was there at all with regard to his position on the public understanding of science.
True.
Or science at all. The thing that drew people there was this current kind of broadening interest in atheism, religion in general, the creation-evolution debate, the kind of, the public conversation and consciousness raising that's gone on. So, it's great. It would have been, if you just said that the Charles Simonyi Chair of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford was coming to UT to give a lecture, there wouldn't have been 1,400 people standing out there.
Maybe not. But the fact is, that's what he is, and
Yes.
they showed up to see him, and that's pretty cool.
Yes.
I mean, because among other things, he did talk a lot about science. Sort of tangentially to his talk about atheism, but certainly he brought it up. Richard Dawkins, speaking of him, and speaking also of Ben Stein, they were both in the news. This comes from the New York Times last week, or I think 2 weeks ago. This was shortly after, this was like a couple of days after Richard Dawkins showed up in Austin. He went to Minnesota and hooked up with another guy that we like and respect greatly, P.Z. Myers, the author of the blog Pharyngula, who is an evolutionary biologist in the University of Minnesota Morris. And lo and behold, there happened to be a screening of this movie, Expelled, that day that Richard Dawkins was visiting. And so P.Z. Myers signed up on their free and open website that said sign up for the free screening of Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed with Ben Stein, which I believe, from what I've read, this website where you could sign up for free tickets was an open web page that anybody could log into, but
right.
Mostly it was being target mailed to Christian groups.
Right.
So naturally, somebody forwarded it to P.Z. Myers, and he looked it up and said, "Sure, I'll go there." And he signed up with a certain number of guests.
And honestly, while I don't have any evidence of anything surrounding this, and I don't want to fall into the paranoid conspiracy theory, it seems rather serendipitous that they would have a screening in Minneapolis at the same time that Atheist Alliance International is having their conference. I mean, it would be cool if somebody could track down when they actually scheduled this and how it relates to the announcement of this conference.
Right.
But there wasn't a screening in Austin, or I'd have found a way to go.
Yeah, I would too.
And so we'll see it when it comes out.
But anyway, what happened was P.Z. Myers signed up under his own name, and so when he got there, the security thugs were waiting for him. And they showed up and they said, "Oh, are you Paul Myers? I'm sorry, but the producer has specially asked me to get you out of line." So P.Z. Myers got kicked out, but Richard Dawkins was only listed as one of the unnamed guests of P.Z. Myers. They had no idea that he was coming, and so he got in and saw the movie, and there's a very entertaining review of it on his website now, richarddawkins.net, I believe. So this has stirred up a big controversy, and one of the amusing things about these particular characters, Dawkins and P.Z. Myers together, is that they were both in the movie. They were interviewed under false pretenses for a movie called Crossroads where they went in claiming that they were going to cover both sides of the evolution debate, when in fact they were intending all along to make this a movie Expelled about the perils of big evil science. And so that was funny because they kicked him out while at the same time acknowledging him as one of the stars of the movie in the end credits.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, and I'm sure we'll get to this after the movie when we talk about it, it's just been this parade of lies. They lie about what the movie is in order to get the interviews. They lie to him throughout the process of the interviews. If you read a report from Michael Shermer, they continually asked him this one question over and over again. And at some point he said, "Are you just asking me that question as many times as possible until I give you the answer you want?" And Ben Stein actually got up, I'm not saying it happened at this point, got up and left and said, "I need a break," after they'd been interviewing for a short period of time, and goes down to his car and comes back and asks a few more questions and then goes right back to the other question that he was asking. I just, it's clear to me that they're...
Well, the question wouldn't be, by any chance, anyone?
Anyone? No, it's clear to me that they were doing their best to solicit specific answers for use. They were trying to exercise some framing in asking a question in such a way that you get the response that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And they were failing, which means they're really bad at this. So this happens. Then there's the whole production of the movie, the lying about what it's about. They've lied about. The other day they claimed that their blog was the #1 blog, and PZ showed statistics.
No, well, this is actually a funny story, so I want to go into a little more detail about it. PZ Myers blogged about being kicked out of the movie,
right.
And this became a really popular post. And so then the producers of Expelled, and not only was his post really popular, but a lot of other people commented on his post about being kicked out of the movie. And those became popular. And so a few days later, the producers of the movie come back and they say, "Hey, look, Expelled is one of the most popular topics on the internet right now."
You wouldn't believe the buzz about our new movie. That's exactly the way it went down. And meanwhile, you've got, it's not just the idea that somebody who's in the movie, who's thanked for being in the movie, is removed from the line while somebody else isn't. Richard Dawkins, after the movie was over and there was a question and answer period, stood up from the middle of the theater, and I'm pretty sure I would have given at least part of an appendage to be there to see the look on this guy's face when it happens. Because he stands up and says, "I'm Richard Dawkins, and I'd like to ask as my question why one of my colleagues who also appears in this film was denied access to see it, when your whole point is that big science is denying you access to express your views." And there was this huge back and forth, and Mark Mathis, I think is his name, who's the producer of the movie,
yeah, that's right,
blatantly lied, and has told 4 or 5 different stories at different times about why PZ was excluded. And at one point, he finally said, no, he wasn't causing any disturbance, etc. I didn't want PC to see the movie because I want him to wait in line in April and pay his $10 to see it. And holy cow, you paid this guy to appear in your movie. Couldn't you just charge him $10 less and let him see the preview? You really need his $10? You already lied to him to get the information you need, and now you're, I want him to pay to see this.
Not to mention the fact that he was in a line full of people who were seeing the movie for free.
Yeah. I get it. And now, there was this whole phone call thing, which I don't know if you've got on there.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't bring that with me, but that was kind of funny, too.
The other day, they're having a conference call about the movie and telling all kinds of lies, because the premise of this movie, for those who don't know, is that Darwinism, whatever the hell that is, leads to atheism, which leads to Nazism, which leads to the Holocaust. Oh, and by the way, they won't let us talk about intelligent design in schools. But the real point of the movie is that Darwinism leads to atheism.
Well,
leads
it's
to
all
Nazism,
tied together because by censoring people who would like to talk about intelligent design, they're acting as totalitarian Nazis.
Yes. Although,
which is ridiculous.
Using it as a metaphor is one thing. Evidently, in the film, they cut back and forth between Dawkins and P.Z. Myers and goose-stepping Nazis, and Ben Stein goes on a tour of concentration camps. They're making this point rather strong.
Right.
And it's insane.
Subtle. Very subtle.
So PZ finds out what the secret password is to their call-in conference call because one of them said it. Hey, here's the secret password. And he calls in to challenge them on this and say, basically, I keep hearing you guys lie about all this. You know, don't you realize there was anti-Semitism in Germany long before even Nazism? If that's your thing, look up pogrom. You know, get some actual pogrom. Get some actual information on the subject. But they were like, who is this? And he's like, it's P.Z. Myers. Oh, you're the guy who tried to crash the screening, and now you're crashing our call. And he's like, I mean, they're misrepresenting the whole thing. They talk about how their blog's #1, and so he posted numbers about it. And then they basically said, you weren't invited to this call. We need you to leave. And
do the honorable thing and hang
and he's
up.
like, I'll do the honorable thing and hang up while you guys do the dishonorable thing and keep lying. But before I go, I'd like to let any media and news services know that if they'd like to talk to somebody about this, because these guys were accusing Myers and Dawkins of not addressing the actual topic, the subject matter in their film, that they were just pulling up these ancillary kind of arguments against it. And so he gave his email address to the media, and I'm sure he's even more flooded than normal. But
well, unfortunately, this is turning into the show where we just talk about other people's blogs.
Yes.
But and speaking of which, I'll just remind people who tuned in late that you can go to my own blog, or to atheistexperience.blogspot.com, the show's blog, and see the post that I wrote today, which is basically a list of links to stuff relating to this topic.
But let's get back to what you were talking about, because we got sidetracked there.
We have a couple of callers.
Yeah, the calls are starting to come in. The numbers up on the
get to them
screen. After they're done with the screening, we'll get to that.
Yeah. Well, trust Matt Nisbet to show up in his blog, Framing Science, and insert his unasked for 2 cents about P.Z. Myers' impact.
Which he's perfectly free to do.
Yes, he is.
And we're perfectly free to think he's a moron for doing it.
And we do. Nisbet posts a clip from the movie that involved the sliced-up interview of P.Z. Myers. And I don't know how the full interview went, but actually I thought that P.Z. Myers looked pretty much fine in that clip.
Yeah, I had no problem with it at all.
But he says, if you haven't seen this clip yet, here above is a preview of the central message on how big science views religion in the documentary Expelled. There's little work needed on the part of the producers, since the message is spelled out via the interview provided by P.Z. Myers and Richard Dawkins interviews. Notice the very clear translation for audiences as to what supposedly establishment science believes. Learning about science makes you an atheist. It kills off religious faith. If we boost science literacy in society, it will lead to erosion of religion as religion fades away. We will get more and more science and less religion. Religion is a fairy tale. That's a direct quote from PZ. Similar to hobgoblins, a fantasy, and even evil. The simplistic and unscientific claim that more knowledge leads to less religion might be the particular delusion of Dawkins, Myers, and many others, but it is by no means the official position of science, though they often implicitly claim to speak for science.
What is the official position of science? Since isn't Nisbet the official spokesman for science?
Mark,
are you the official spokesman for science? Does science have an official position?
Well, skipping down to the end of this post, he says, so, Richard and PZ, when it comes to Expelled, it's time to let other people be the messengers for science. This is not about censoring your ideas and positions, but rather being smart, strategic, tactical, and ultimately effective in promoting science rather than your own personal ideology, books, or blogs.
Hey, you know something? Hey, Nisbet, if you're watching, I can explain this to you. You're a tool. They're not the messengers for science. They didn't go out looking for this. They were specifically approached by the producers of the movie. And you know why? Because they're the ones who are most likely to say the things that the producers wanted in the movie in the first place. That's why they didn't come talk to you, because you're irrelevant. You're a softie. You're not willing to say the things that need to be said in order to appear in this movie. And you're certainly not advocating science. You're just sitting around denigrating the people who you think put you in a bad position. Go away.
Well, and beyond that, they're not really the official spokespeople for science.
Nobody
They're
is.
just a couple of guys who write books and blogs. But they happen to be incredibly popular books and blogs.
Yeah.
And the reason they're incredibly popular is because a whole bunch of people enjoy reading what they have to say, us included.
If you can't get popular by imitating them, sure, let's get popular by criticizing them.
Yeah,
Way to go,
just
Nisbet.
gripe about how popular they are. So I'm going to get, and there's also linked on the blog PZ's reaction to Nisbet, which I think I won't read because you can go read it yourself. But it should be pretty obvious what we think about Nisbet's point of view about framing science at this point.
Yeah, his response uses the F word and not framing or faith.
Right, which we use all the time on the nonprofits, but we kind of try to self-censor around here.
F yeah.
But I'm going to wrap up here with a few thoughts because I'm sure that all our loyal audience are sitting there waiting to hear me say, "But Russell, what do you think about how we should frame atheism?" Everybody's just been hanging on for this moment, no doubt.
But Russell, what do you think about how we should be framing atheism?
I have a few things to say about this. And I will finish this up and then take some callers who it seems do want to talk about framing a
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I represent Big Science, who is here to prevent Russell from presenting his view. I'm sorry. That's not the way things actually work.
I'm stopping this sketch because it's become too silly. Atheism does have a framing problem. There is basically a political problem where atheism is defined as an evil and immoral ideology among people who just want to go around sinning without being hampered by the God who wants you to behave in a moral way. And that's idiotic. And it's how a lot of people see atheism. There are a lot of people in the country who have a vested interest in turning the discussion about religion into a whole big talk about it being us versus them. It's the mean, evil secularists who are causing this culture war and want to destroy society's morals. And the result is that we should write into our legislation what Richard Dawkins highlighted in the Texas Constitution, that there shall be no religious test for office, same as the U.S. Constitution, as long as the candidate believes in a supreme being. But Matt Nisbet is right about one thing, which is that 80% of the United States is Christian, and that's not going to change very soon. Which is why I think, and maybe Matt Nisbet would agree with me, that it would be a mistake to turn this into a big us versus them battle. Sort of framing it as, you're either with us or you're our enemy. Guess what? If us means atheists, then we're going to have 80% of America being our enemies. And that isn't something that we want to aim at, nor should we. But I don't think there's a problem overall with treating this as a battle of us versus them. In fact, I think we shouldn't shy away from the conflict. I think we should embrace it. It's just that I think that it's important to get our say about who us and them actually are. People like Jerry Falwell, the late Jerry Falwell, and the current James Dobson and Pat Robertson are always talking about a culture war. And I think that if somebody says that they're in a war against you, then, like it or not, you're in a war against them. You just can't help it. If somebody says, I'm going to come kick your butt, you can't avoid a fight by saying, I'm not going to fight. But what people like this rely on is that they will turn it into a fight between atheists and religious people. And I think that that the framing that is valid here is redrawing the battle lines. Because it's not about religion versus no religion. Because the religion side includes a lot of people that reasonable religious people don't and shouldn't identify with. Like, just to rattle off a few, Fred Phelps, Jerry Falwell, Tim LaHaye, the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, and Osama bin Laden. I mean, the former presidential candidate Mitt Romney gave a speech on religion, which we just thought was dead wrong, where he said freedom requires religion, just like religion requires freedom.
Prove it. Prove it.
Not true. And as long as we all believe in God, and of course he was trying to justify why Christians should vote for a Mormon, then we're all on the same side. And I thought it was interesting because he didn't exclude Osama bin Laden from that. Whereas we are emphatically not on the side of Osama bin Laden. And so here's what I think is the frame. The frame is not religious people versus not religious people. The important battle lines are sane people versus nuts. And the sane people are the people on our side and include a whole lot of people who believe in God. And we disagree with them. We think that God is not real, like Richard Dawkins does. But we also believe that reasonable people can disagree without trying to kill each other, without trying to obliterate each other, without trying to legislate away each other's rights. We believe that we can do things like this program, where we talk about our rational reasons for not believing in God, and then we take callers and they argue with us, and sometimes they make good points, and we still disagree with them, but we hang up friends. I think that if people like Pat Robertson and Tim LaHaye want to say we're in a culture war, fine. Let it be a war of them against everybody else.
Yeah.
They're the ones who declared the damn war. Let them fight against the 80% of sane people in the country. And I think Matt Nisbet comes dangerously close to the wrong side of that line when he reacts to P.Z. Myers and Richard Dawkins just expressing their opinion, which is something that rational people do, and saying, please stop talking now because you will make people afraid of you. Screw you, Nisbet.
Can I get an amen? Anyway, we got callers on all the lines, and I don't want to keep people holding because we're actually running behind where we normally would be. But that was good stuff to get to.